We all know the journey of Luffy and Ace as they traveled the seas as pirates. But what if these two brothers had actually listened to Garp and joined the Marines? Would the brothers be able to stay in the Marines after learning of the corruption of the world government and put their duty above their morals? Well, for this to happen, we rewind back to Luffy's childhood, where we see him and Ace training together with Sabo as Garp watches over them. It wouldn't be long before the tragedy with Sabo occurs, and much like the original timeline, Luffy and Ace would supposedly lose their brother. Despite the tragic events that occurred, Luffy and Ace train with the aim of becoming Marines because of Garp and how they want to save the world by becoming heroes of justice. Prior to the eventual departure from Dawn Island, Luffy had befriended the red-haired pirate Shanks. Much like the original timeline, Luffy would frequently bicker with Shanks, but this time his dream would be to become the greatest Marine hero in the world and to surpass even his grandfather. Despite Shanks being a pirate, he still had a soft spot for Luffy. Luffy would then proceed to eat the Gomu Gomu no Mi much like in the original timeline. The same stuff would happen. Shanks would lose his arm and give Luffy the straw hat, but he wouldn't be able to inspire Luffy into becoming a pirate. However, I do think Luffy wouldn't be as against pirates as Marines normally are due to the fact that he had such a fun time with the red-haired pirates and may even have dreams of making something similar to a crew of his own, but as a Marine. Now, when do you think Ace would leave for his indoctrination into the Marines? Much like the original timeline, Ace would leave 3 years before Luffy does, but to join up with the Marines. Luffy would soon follow in his footsteps and would head off to the sea to find a military base. Unfortunately, though, he's still as dumb as before and would soon end up on Alvida's ship in a barrel. After making a mess of the pirate ship, Luffy would befriend Kobe, and the two would go on to Shellstown in the hopes of joining the Marines. Upon reaching Shellstown, Kobe and Luffy head to the Marine base. On the way, they learn about the bounty hunter, Roronoa Zoro, as well as the rumors about Axe Hand Morgan. Luffy isn't specifically looking for Zoro in this timeline since our boy isn't a pirate. That begs the question, which of the original Straw Hats do you think will join Luffy or befriend him in this timeline? Well, I'll be answering that specific question chronologically, and who knows, there might be a few different people Luffy brings on board with him due to his nature. Coming back to the topic, Luffy would learn more about why Zoro was captured and the tyranny of Axe Hand Morgan. The information would thoroughly annoy the pure-hearted Luffy, who would be keen on bringing Morgan to justice, despite the fact that it may just put a stop to his aim of joining the Marines. Despite the risks, Luffy frees Zoro, and the two end up fighting the Marines and the corrupt base commander. The duo would eventually defeat the captain and would run into more Marines later on. Only this time, Luffy would be surprised to find Ace leading the group. By this point, Ace would have acquired the Mera Mera no Mi on his journey and would have succeeded in enlisting. Due to Ace's obvious power, it wouldn't take him long to rack up accomplishments, and considering Garp's backing, Ace would be a captain in the Marines by this time. After a happy reunion, Ace would gladly enlist Luffy and Kobe into the Marines. Zoro wouldn't be too keen on the idea, but I'm pretty sure Luffy would convince him or force him into joining the Marines with him as well. With Ace's blessing, the three would become new recruits along with Helmeppo, since the guy has an annoying charm to him. Now, originally, Garp took on Kobe and Helmeppo and trained the two into some pretty effective powerhouses by the time that the Marineford War arrived. But in this scenario, a lot of things wouldn't happen, including the Paramount War itself. It's hard to start a war considering that Ace is enlisted in the Marines. I'll discuss that more when we get to the point. But right now, I'm sure you want to know what happened after the enlistment. Luffy, Zoro, Kobe, and Helmeppo are put under Ace's charge, who is ultimately under Garp's charge. Both Ace and Garp would make sure to drill training deep into the new recruits. Among Luffy's first missions would be a trip down to Arlong Park to take down a certain pirate and a corrupt Marine. Ace would lead the group on the mission where they would first gather evidence over the corrupt Marine before eventually going toe-to-toe with Arlong. With Ace in the picture, our little shark friend would turn into grilled fish no sooner than Luffy could shout out one of his attacks. I'm pretty sure it would be quite the short and lackluster fight since there wouldn't be any high risks involved. Considering Ace's Logia powers, Arlong would stand no chance, and Ace would quite possibly incinerate him in an instant before capturing the fool. Since Luffy never has a run-in with Buggy in this instance, he would never have met Nami either. Nami would not be a part of Luffy's friends, but at the very least, her village would be saved from the likes of Arlong. Unfortunately for Usopp though, since Luffy never went to Syrup Village. In the original timeline, Kuro's ultimate goal was to kill Kaya and inherit her fortune. He intended to do this by staging an attack on the village, which would lead to Kaya's death. Kuro planned to use Kaya's will, which he manipulated to ensure he would inherit her wealth. Kuro intended to kill anyone who might reveal his true identity or interfere with his plan, including Kaya, her friends, and any villagers who got in his way. With no one to stop him, Kuro's plan would succeed, and it is quite likely that both Usopp and Kaya would lose their lives. I know it's a dark turn of events, but we need to keep the story in accordance with the nature of the world of One Piece, and Luffy's presence proved to be key in liberating a lot of places. So unfortunately, I'll have to bite the bullet and say that Usopp's demise would be the most likely scenario in this case. Now we know what happened to 3 of the original Straw Hats, but don't lose all hope since you still haven't seen what would happen with the rest. Continuing with where we left off, Luffy and the unit would continue to train during their off times and would be sent on dangerous missions because Garp really didn't know how to train people in a normal fashion. Soon after, the unit hears news that the Barati was taken over by Don Krieg. Our party would head on over without Ace this time to discover clues about what had happened. In this scenario, Luffy would come across a beaten-up Sanji who would tell everyone about the tyranny of Krieg. Sanji then joins up with Luffy after learning that he intends to take the Barati back from the notorious pirate. The gang would eventually track down the Krieg pirates and end up in a difficult battle, but would eventually succeed and free the Barati before taking Krieg under custody. Seeing all of this, Sanji joins up with Luffy and chooses to enlist in the Marines to see what he can do about his dream, as well as to repay his debt to Luffy for saving Zeph's treasure. So what happens to Chopper after all of this? Well, it's important to note that Wapol was the official ruler of Drum Island and hence wouldn't be directly targeted by the Marines. As such, Luffy would never set foot on the island and things would continue on as they were since Chopper and Luffy never met. Another important plotline in the original timeline was everything that went on in Alabasta. Wondering how it all went down in our timeline. Continuing the story, Ace has had a conversation with Smoker prior to all of this and agrees to help in discovering what Crocodile is up to in Alabasta. The team would stumble upon Vivi during their travels and would help escort her to her country after learning what was going down. Most of you who are already caught up with One Piece already know that Luffy actually met up with Ace during the Alabasta arc and fought off Smoker. Considering that in this story, everyone is on the same team, how do you think things would go? Continuing with the story, our gang of Marines would go on to dismantle Baroque works, starting from the bottom before eventually reaching Crocodile himself. The fight would be much easier, considering that there are 2 Logia users on the team along with Luffy. Both Smoker and Ace would prove to be too much for Crocodile, and Luffy would probably not even need to lift a finger to beat him. This is also where Luffy and Nico Robin would interact, but instead of joining the crew, she would go her own way and eventually end up with the revolutionaries. But more on that later. After sending Crocodile off to Impel Down, our gang would return to report to Garp and would receive some well-deserved promotions due to their acts. Once Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Kobe, and Helmeppo get a bit stronger, Garp begins training them to use Rokushiki, the superhuman martial arts style. Ace continues getting stronger as well, but by this time, both brothers begin to harbor some doubt over the Marines. After seeing what happened in Alabasta, the two can't help but blame the Marines for letting Crocodile's actions slide just because he was designated a warlord of the sea. They already knew that a few Marines were corrupt, but visually seeing the tyranny that the Marines let happen causes them to harbor some resentment. In this timeline, Luffy never goes to Thriller Bark, and the fiasco at Eni's lobby won't take place either. Perhaps the most important thing that doesn't happen is the Paramount War, since Ace never needed to be captured, and so all the events that took place due to his capture wouldn't occur. Whitebeard would continue to be an emperor, and Blackbeard wouldn't be able to gain the support of the Marines, and neither would he be able to get his crew since Luffy never made a mess of Impel Down. Unfortunately though, Brook never joins up with Luffy since Thriller Bark never happened, and neither does Frankie join the team. Soon after, Garp takes Ace and his unit, consisting of our gang, to Sabaody Archipelago. This event is in line with when the 9 supernovas are also present on the archipelago. The gang is undercover and meant to keep an eye on their surroundings since a certain celestial dragon also intends to make his appearance there. Garp gets word that Silver's Rayleigh is being sold at the auction house, to which he comments that it's probably to pay off his gambling debt. I bet you're wondering how the gang will respond to things in this specific situation, since fans of the series would remember how bad things get for the Straw Hats. Would things be different this time? Well, let's see! Garp tells Ace to keep a check on Rayleigh while Kobe and Helmeppo stay with Garp himself. The unit ends up in an auction house where Rayleigh is to be bid upon and ends up being in the same area as the celestial dragons who have appeared to bid on the slaves. The team watches as different slaves are presented in front of the audience. Luffy watches all of this in horror. At one point, a fisherman is presented as a keepsake, and the person who bids for him is a certain Saint Charlos. After winning the bid, the saint proceeds to shoot the fisherman dead right in front of the crowd, shocking everyone. Considering the celestial dragons are not bound by any law, the auction proceeds without any further hitches. Luffy, on the other hand, is absolutely enraged at what just happened, and Ace has to hold his brother down and keep him calm. This doesn't help for long, as soon a bunch of girls are lined up, and Saint Charlos again bids on one of the prettiest women in the group. A man suddenly appears, pleading with the saint not to take away the woman as she happens to be his wife. The man gets on his knees and begs the saint by touching his feet. The move disgusts the celestial dragon, who proceeds to shoot the man and kick him away. Luffy finally snaps. He pushes Ace away and heads straight for Charlos. We all know what happens next, as Luffy punching a world noble in the face was a move that everyone remembers quite clearly. Even though Luffy is a marine in this story, his pure-hearted nature never changes, and it's clear that he would not stand for such tyranny in front of his eyes. So what happens next? Will Luffy be able to continue being a marine? Would Ace continue to support him? What about Garp? How would he deal with this situation? With the world noble down, the guards quickly close in on Luffy. Ace and the rest have to fight back as well, resulting in complete chaos. Until Rayleigh appears and uses his conqueror's haki to knock out all the guards in the auction house. Rayleigh recognizes the straw hat on Luffy and quickly grasps the situation. Meanwhile, the news of Luffy hitting a world noble quickly spreads throughout the island, causing widespread panic as everyone knows the consequences. An admiral will be dispatched to deal with the offender. Most of the supernovas decide to leave leave to avoid the inevitable dispatch of an admiral, though a few curious ones stay behind to see which admiral will come. At Marie Joie, the news reaches Sengoku, who becomes greatly shocked upon hearing that Luffy is the culprit. A marine informs him that the pirates have taken the world nobles hostage at the human auction house but have not yet made any demands. Suddenly, Admiral Kizaru speaks up, telling Sengoku that he will handle the situation. Word reaches Garp, who rushes towards Luffy's location in a panic, realizing that Luffy's actions would mark him as a rogue. As Kizaru arrives at Sabaody, the atmosphere turns dire. His mere presence spells doom for the pirate. Kizaru, with his light-based powers, proves to be an overwhelming force. He effortlessly takes down several supernovas, showcasing the gap in strength between the rookies and the admirals. Meanwhile, Luffy, Ace, and the rest are confronted by Sentomaru and the Pacifistas, the advanced human weapons modeled after Bartholomew Kuma. There is absolute chaos, as Kizaru finally reaches Luffy and the gang, right when Garp catches up to them. Garp tries to plead with Kizaru, but his request falls on deaf ears. Rayleigh makes an appearance as well, allowing our gang to retreat, only to be confronted by the real Bartholomew Kuma. Kuma uses his powers and starts launching everyone to an unknown location. Ace gives it his all and begins fighting against Kuma, but the warlord proves to be extremely difficult to stop. Before launching Luffy, Kuma reveals that he's going to send the brothers to a safe place and launches Ace and Luffy both in their moments of hesitation. I think most of you will be able to guess where I'm going with this. Where exactly did Kuma launch our rogue marines, and what could this safe haven be? You won't have to wonder for long though. After flying for 3 days, Luffy, Ace, Sanji, and Zoro land on the island of Baltigo. The confused bunch was eventually confronted by the revolutionaries, among whom was a familiar face to Luffy and Ace. Sabo made his appearance. Ace was the first to recognize his long-lost brother. He looked upon Sabo in confusion before saying his name. Sabo's head was suddenly flooded with memories of the past as he saw Ace and Luffy in front of him. The brothers began sobbing and embraced in an exceptionally emotional reunion. The three caught up with what Sabo was up to before telling him about their own journeys with the Marines and how they'd quite recently gone rogue. Ace punches Luffy in the head for not controlling himself, but admits that he'd found the Marines' atrocities hard to bear. Sabo then tells everyone all about the Revolutionary Army and how they oppose the world government and the world nobles. Sabo escorts everyone to the leader of the revolutionaries while giving information about the army's various escapades. Upon entering a room, Luffy and the rest would find Monkey D. Dragon. Considering how One Piece tends to have lighthearted moments in the oddest of places, I'm going to assume that Luffy would say out loud how he thinks that his name and Dragon's name are pretty similar. Right before Sabo tells the champ that Dragon is his father. The ensuing reunion between father and son may not be as emotional as the reunion with Sabo, since Luffy never knew his father. Dragon may ask him how he came here and could tell him how he'd been watching over him and always felt Luffy would find out the truth about the world nobles. As the bunch gets done with catching up, Dragon tells them to display their progress and power prior to letting them join the revolutionaries. Our gang shows off their current strength level via a sparring match with Dragon himself. Each of them is thoroughly beaten, except for Ace, who does a good job of keeping up with Dragon. Dragon determines that each of the guys has enough potential, but tells them that they require the proper training. Luffy ends up meeting with Nico Robin as well, after the incident at Alabasta. She tells him about how she joined up with the revolutionaries and has been with them since. Meanwhile, Ace has an idea. Now, I bet you're all wondering what would happen since the Paramount War never happened. Well, despite the fact that Ace is still alive and the Straw Hats are mostly together, we still need to train them to face the new world. It's clear to everyone in the group that they aren't anywhere near the top of the food chain, with people like Rayleigh and Kizaru around. After becoming rogues, they've effectively made the world government their enemies. What would Garp have to say about all of this? And what do Kobe and Helmeppo intend to do? A lot of questions come up, but first, we have to see where our boys will go to train. Let's go back to Ace's idea. Ace proposes that Luffy and Zoro go back to find Rayleigh to train them, considering the infamy of the man. Ace escorts the two, along with Sabo, who sneak into Sabaody Archipelago and somehow find Rayleigh without raising an alarm. Rayleigh proceeds to ask a few questions of Luffy, but considering that Shanks already told him about Luffy, Rayleigh agrees to take on both him and Zoro as his apprentices. We've already seen how strong Zoro became under the tutelage of Dracula Mihawk, but Rayleigh is also a pure swordsman and was one of the strongest around during Gol D. Rogers' time, so he would be an equally effective teacher. Sabo and Ace then leave Luffy and Zoro with Rayleigh before returning to the base. Rayleigh goes on to drag the two to a deserted island for some hellish training. This will be the point of the time skip. Sanji and Ace will train with the revolutionaries along with Robin, while Zoro and Luffy are trained by Rayleigh. Much like the original timeline, our boys will become much stronger by the end of their training period, learning how to wield haki and overall becoming able to deal with the threats they would now have to face. Ace and Luffy decide that they must free the people of the world from the rule of the world government. Meanwhile, Garp is depressed and anxious due to the fact that bounties have been placed on both Ace and Luffy. His duty dictates that he bring the rogues to justice, but it's difficult when the rogues in question are your grandsons. Besides, Garp knows why Luffy did what he did, and he can't blame him since he knows his nature. Garp proceeds to focus on training Kobe and Helmeppo, both of whom now harbor significant doubts over the justice system of the Marines, but stay enlisted instead of trying to find Luffy. They would soon go on to become members of SWORD during the time skip, a Marine headquarters secret special force that consists of Marines who have formally resigned themselves from the actual command structure of the organization, but still operate on its behalf. Now, you're probably all wondering where the story will lead, since a lot of the events that drove the world into chaos haven't happened in this timeline, like the death of Whitebeard and the appearance of a new emperor. But don't worry just yet, since we'll be raising the stakes in a bit to ensure that something awesome happens. After 2 years, our gang has become strong enough to be among the strongest members of the Revolutionary Army. With Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Ace, the revolutionaries are able to start fighting more on the front foot in an attempt to liberate the different islands under the rule of the world government. But first things first, they intend to break the morale of the Marines by targeting their most secure prison, Impel Down, and freeing Ivankov. Before that, the revolutionaries intend to gather weapons, resources, and manpower. So Sabo, Ace, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are sent to Dressrosa along with a few other revolutionaries to pillage Don Quixote Doflamingo's supplies. The gang succeeds in infiltrating the island and successfully disrupting Doflamingo's supply line and tyrannical rule. The fight is much easier than in the original timeline, since Ace proves to be an exceptionally powerful fighter now that he's awakened his devil fruit, and our monster trio is just as powerful as before, with Luffy having unlocked Gear 4. After dismantling the operations in Dressrosa, the next step is to go for Impel Down. Dragon tasks the group, along with Morley, Karasu, Bilo Betty, and Lindbergh, commanders of the revolutionary armies. With Morley, the team breaks into Impel Down covertly and digs down to Ivankov, who is already gathering prisoners and biding time for Dragon's go-ahead. After meeting up with Luffy and the rest, Sabo tells Ivankov that it's time to break out. The gang creates absolute chaos and mass destruction, freeing prisoners left and right to create an adequate distraction. They avoid a direct encounter with Magellan, but I assume that even if they did have to fight Magellan head-on after the time skip, Ace, Luffy, and Sabo would prove to be too much for Magellan to handle, especially with Ace having an awakened devil fruit. Either way, the gang escapes with Ivankov and a whole bunch of new recruits, including Jimbei. In this iteration, both Crocodile and Doflamingo also make their escapes due to the ensuing chaos. Remember that Doflamingo was recently captured, so he'd be quick to escape. With the destruction caused in Impel Down, the Marines are now fuming. At the same time, Whitebeard sees an opportunity. Whitebeard was already on death's bed before the time skip, but sensing that his time was near, Whitebeard intended to go out with a bang and deal a significant blow to the Marines. Seeing the recent acts by the Revolutionary Army, Whitebeard went to meet with Dragon to form an alliance of sorts. The two meet near the waters of Baltigo, but the Marines receive word of Whitebeard heading off to meet the leader of the Revolutionary Army, which causes panic among the top brass. The alliance is forged, and Whitebeard intends to take on the Marines eventually, after being convinced by Dragon. Not long after, the news spreads that Whitebeard is now allied with the Revolutionary Army. This is right before the reverie takes place. Much like in the original timeline, the revolutionaries begin their plan to declare war on the world nobles. Sabo, Ace, Karasu, Morley, and Luffy infiltrate Mary Jouise and find Kuma as a slave to the world nobles. The infiltration soon turns into a rescue mission, and the gang succeeds in rescuing Kuma and the other slaves, destroying the symbol of the Celestial Dragons to declare war and destroying the Celestial Dragons' food storage. Due to the increase in members and the alliance with Whitebeard, the Marines catch wind of the Revolutionary Army's base. The chaos caused by Mary Jouise means that the army can no longer be ignored, and the top brass determines that they have to be dealt with promptly. Upon orders of the Gorosei, the largest Buster Call in history is invoked on the island of Baltigo. The Buster Call is led by all 3 admirals and numerous vice admirals, including Garp himself. This attack would be on a scale even larger than that of Marineford. It's also important to note that Fujitora is not an admiral in this iteration, as Sengoku never retired, and as such, Fujitora never started the movement to revoke the rights of the 7 warlords of the sea. The Cross Guild never formed either, but Crocodile, Doflamingo, and Buggy are free due to the mess at Impel Down. So how do you think this battle will turn out? Let's find out. The top members of the revolutionaries all make their stand, with Dragon leading the army. Whitebeard is still nowhere to be seen, so the revolutionaries have to fight against 3 admirals. The odds are definitely not in their favor. The battle commences with Dragon taking on Admiral Sakazuki, Sabo, Luffy, and Ace fight against Kuzan, while Zoro and Sanji fight against Kizaru. They're accompanied by the commanders of the Revolutionary Army, and the fight is absolutely intense, with Garp, Kobe, and Helmeppo in the fray as well. The ships are eventually seen on the horizon as more Marines and Pacifista arrive, accompanied by Draculae Mihawk and Gecko Moria, as well as new weapons called the Seraphim. But not all hope is lost as Whitebeard's crew makes their appearance. Whitebeard's entrance is enough to demoralize the Marines as they begin to frantically call for more reinforcements waiting nearby. Unfortunately though, before Whitebeard can arrive, Sabo is critically injured. Kuzan is about to deal a finishing blow, but Luffy intercepts and is knocked out. Ace comes to Sabo's rescue, but the emotions Luffy was feeling due to the heat of the battle spark something inside of him. Suddenly, the air is filled with the thunderous sound of drum beats. Luffy's body begins to emit white smoke, swirling around him like a storm. In a flash, the smoke transforms into streaks of black lightning, crackling with the raw power of Conqueror's haki. The sudden burst of energy knocks out countless low-ranked Marines, leaving them sprawled on the ground. The drums of liberation pounded faster as Luffy's face broke into a wide, fierce grin and he opened his eyes. The moment had arrived. Gear 5 was unleashed. Even the admirals were shocked as Luffy became the embodiment of Joy Boy. Whitebeard instantly recognized him from the prophecy and realized that Luffy was the one who would liberate the world. With the arrival of Whitebeard and Luffy's transformation, the Marines reeled back. The elders were informed of the recent turnaround, and they knew they couldn't lose the majority of their strongest pawns. What made matters worse was that Kaido had left Wano with his entire crew after hearing that Whitebeard was fighting against the Marines. The odds were dire, but the elders wouldn't stand for it. Suddenly, black circles began appearing on the battlefield, and the 5 elders made their appearance. They would instantly transform into their awakened Zoan forms, ruining the balance of the war. There are numerous powerful fighters now on the island of Baltigo, and this war could go in any direction. The strongest heroes we have are Luffy, Whitebeard, Dragon, Ace, Marco, and the other commanders of both the Revolutionary Army and the Whitebeard Pirates. Zoro is definitely going for Mihawk, while Sanji is thoroughly pounding Gecko Moria. The Seraphim are on the side of the Marines, along with the admirals and the elders. Not to mention that Kaido is making his way to the war, working as a wild card that may tip the battle in favor of the Revolutionary Whitebeard Alliance. So many things could go wrong for our heroes, and we don't know how many would survive in the end, but this timeline would definitely have one of the coolest wars around. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to stay updated with all the videos I post in the future.